Let me just pray. Lord, thank you that you would lead this discussion. We give it to you. We ask for your grace. We ask for your leading in this time. Would you just show us what it is exactly that we have to deal with? Have your way. Open our hearts and our minds, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. This is a really big discussion. It can become a very, very painful discussion. I've had people give me threats of death as a result of this discussion. From the left wing, from the right wing now, I'm persona non grata in certain areas. And I want to say this, my views are irrelevant. What does God want? So I have 67 slides that I've taken from hours and hours of sessions that we've been doing since 2012 on the land issue. This issue first really started burning in my heart after the Agri-SA versus Minister of Energy way back early, just after 2010, 2012, 2013. And we've been writing and thinking and debating. And every time we deal with it, we think we've dealt with the issue. Right, come on, let's get on. And it just gets hotter and it burns more. And people get more aggressive and we get more polarized. And it's one of the things we've been saying for a very long time in South Africa is we are struggling with this. We've got to sort it out. And a colleague of mine, Erod Fürstenberg at the Pretoria Bar, wrote a book on it recently. And he said he just doesn't understand why we're not sorting it out. Why can we not sort it out? And he thought, well, it's resolved. And he published his book because he said it's coming back. The next election, it's coming back. It's coming back. It's coming back. And we have been sleeping, and the church has been sleeping. And we've let this thing boil. And this is like a festering cancer and sore that we just haven't dealt with. And what we have in South Africa, and this is pretty important for us, is that we have a meeting of ideologies about land in South Africa. And this is where we actually have a fair amount of our clash at the moment. We have a customary approach in law, where the tribe is the custodian of the land for the good of all. We have the Western or the individual approach, where the individual must have authority over his or her land, and that's where we have title deeds. And then we've got the Marxist one as well, where the state owns everything. The last one I throw in is where we have critical race theory ideology, whereas anybody can have the land as long as it's not a white man. If you look at the individual must have authority, title deeds, if you look at a protection mechanism in all of these systems, the first system, the customary title, is the tribe protects you. The tribe holds the land and protects you. That's what it's supposed to be. But when the tribe starts to break and the land is no longer held by the tribe, and you've got different agendas and you've got chiefs selling land to outsiders and being corrupt and it's not working, the whole tribal system starts to collapse. Kutja's going to tell you about a collapse in his area, about his land, that his grandfather worked, that they can't work anymore, the collapse. The Western land, the individual needs to have the title deed. Why? Because the king was abusing the people. He could take it away from you. This goes right back even further before Magna Carta in England, the UK, well, England that time, where you had to protect the individual from the power of the king. Because the king would just say, I like your land, John, out. Remember Ahab, Naboth's vineyard? I want that land out. I kill you. Marxist, and if you can go to the next slide now, please. Marx says the theory of communism may be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property. No private property. It's irrelevant. But capitalism says on an economic system based on private ownership of property and business with the goal of making the greatest possible profits for the owners. But then you've got Adam Smith coming in, where he says, as soon as the land of any country has all become private property, the landlords, like all other men, love to reap where they never sowed and demand a rent even for its natural produce. This is quite difficult. So we've got the extremes. And in South Africa, we have extreme ideologies competing all the time. So on this slide, what I have here is the different uses of land. And we must understand that not everybody approaches land in the same way. So historically, we've got subsistence farming, and now we've got Western farming. Even Marxism says we must produce lots of food from the land. It's commercial, so we can feed the guys in the city, so they can run the industry. We've got a few specialist farmers. This is what they're doing, but it's commercial, as opposed to subsistence. Subsistence, where you look after yourself and your family, and you have a little bit extra, you sell it off, but it's not massive commercial production. But then, if you look at this list that I've got there, you've got domestic, you've got agricultural, commercial, you've got arable land, you've got grazing land, arable, where you're planting, you've got subsistence, you've got industrial, you've got manufacture, and in South Africa we have massive tracts of land that are used for conservation purposes and tourism and leisure. And again, how do we mix them? So now let's go to this, and I just want us to look at some of the maps here, and we're going to start the story. The context and the land in the next, in our discussion. So this here is the next map, you can go to the next slide, is a map that is now the new map of how South Africa looked many years ago. This is the de-colonised map. And this shows all the people groups happily settled in South Africa. Now, this map is upside down, you will see. You see it's upside down? It's because the Eurocentric view of the world shows Africa facing the other way. So now we are rewriting history all the time. And this really scares me, because in my short little lifespan, over the last 30 years, where I lived through the 1992 referendum, I lived through 94, I lived through 96, I've been watching things, I'm realizing that people are telling us lies about the last 30 years. And I was there. I saw some of these things happening. And then I start reading and I go back and I realize, but we're starting to change the narrative as we go back all along. We're starting to deny and tell people different stories, and we'll tell you this is the story. And because this is the story that I'm telling you, you must act now in a certain way. So that map is part of a propaganda story or an ideological struggle at the moment, as far as the land is concerned. This is getting quite scary to me. So that land says everybody's settled in this way and this is how it is. But if you can just jump forward to the next map that I have there, and we're not, okay, let's go to the next map. This story that we have here doesn't take into account the reality of the war of Shaka, the Mfitane. That is well documented and historically what we find to be accurate. And a lot of people say, well, Andrew, where do you get your reading on history? Well, I read as widely as I can. And some of the most incredible stories that I've read have been the accounts of early missionaries. People say, oh, but they're Western. Don't tell me that the French, Swiss missionaries, the Mabiles, the Cassilis families, and there's a book called The Mabiles of Basutoland, who came to South Africa, to Southern Africa as missionaries, who recorded their stories, who hid the Basotho in the rafters of the church from the Free State farmers when there was the war about the Caledon River and about where the Basothos are going to be and not going to be. They hid them. They loved the Basotho. They gave their lives for the Basotho. They translated the Bible into Sesotho. Don't tell me that they're going to come and give me a lie as a story. They recorded it. Go and read it. You could go and read the history of the Moravian Church. There's a book that's written by them. It's a weird title, the twin branch of the pear tree bears fruit. It takes the history of the Moravian Church from 17 something all the way to now, and it accurately, from everything I can read, portrays exactly what happens. And when I see people trying to rewrite history now, I get very, very worried. That map that you've got up there, and you can look at and study it, it shows an incredible movement and a tragic and a genocidal movement of people and what happened to land in South Africa. It's actually one of the most dramatic genocides that was ever perpetrated. We must be very careful when we celebrate the Mfitane and Shaka's rule. We destroyed people groups in South Africa. And what that map shows in particular is a movement in Southern Africa of people and people groups, and it shows how people fled. And Shaka wiped people out. In fact, so much so that it is so well documented, there's just no historical debate about it, that certain areas were void of people This was genocide. And people were fleeing. That map shows how the Klubi fled around Basutoland they were Zulus who fled around to where the Xhosas were. It shows the boundary where the Xhosas were. There's a huge no man's land where the Griquas came to settle where I live now, where they came down and lived later after these wars. We know, and it's so well documented, the history as well of Mzilikazi fleeing from Shaka, coming into this area, wiping out the Tswana. You go to Irene, there are caves there where Mzilikazi's impies wiped out people. They only found those bodies in the time of the ZAR Republic. And those caves are full of those people. They wiped out tribes before them. This is almost like the days of Canaan in a way, and Israel, people being wiped out. It's huge. It's like, okay, what happened? What happened to land in South Africa? The next map shows you the movement of the Great Trek. It shows you what happens now. We've got the colonists who come in 1652. We've got the Dutch. We've got the Huguenots who come in 1688. We've got the British occupation in 1795 and then 1803 or 1806, I can't remember. And then we've got this migration of people up. We've got the 1820 settlers, more English coming in, and we've got this migration up of people all over. We've got Piet Retief, we've got a history, we've got Blood River, we've got battles all over, and people start to settle. This is a complex history. We've got as much documentation as we can about it, and we try and record it and say, okay, this is what's accurate, this is what we've got. But we've still got people staying in certain areas. Notwithstanding the Great Trek, we've got strong Zulu land, we've got strong Pondo land and Xhosa areas. We've got areas where people were never moved out, never. The Pondo people were never conquered. They still live exactly where they have for hundreds of years. I live right next to them. They're a proud history. We sort of forget that. We think, oh, white people took all the land. No, this is not what happened. And what happens from that map, Free State becomes an area where it's decimated. Pockets of people, stragglers. We've got Moshesh in the mountains with his people. And I'm telling you the story. This is the narrative. And you see, okay, but what's happening in Southern Africa? And these white groups start moving out. And you can go and study their history as well. Don't believe everything you older people learnt about the Great Trek. I found a book by Dr. Klute, who wrote about, he gave lectures in the 1850s about what happened. And he was the registrar of the clerk at the Slagtersnek Rebellion, the judge's clerk, who recorded, and he remembers everything. Slagtersnek Rebellion has a different history. The origins of the Great Trek, a different history. Go and find, the source materials are available, go and read them. But what happens is these guys, they want to get away from domination by the British for a number of reasons. And they move. Some people say it's because they didn't want to give up their slaves. Maybe partly true. But if you look at the history, the origin of particularly the French Huguenots, there's a desperate cry not to be under the control and power of other people. We don't want to be persecuted anymore. That's why the French Huguenots came to Africa. But now they move out and they start settling. And now we fast forward, 1899, we've got the Anglo-Boer War, a shocking war. It's fascinating, but it's shocking. And then we've got the Union of South Africa, 1910, and there I've got a flag up there that's apparently hate speech now, but have a look at it. That flag is the symbol of trying to find peace after war. It's got the ZAR, the Transvaal Republic flag, the Free State flag, and the British flag saying, guys, we're trying to find peace here. But there are tragedies as well. When they were negotiating 1910, they were saying, okay, how do we include everybody in this country? And there were certain groups who said, listen, we will join. This is part of a tragedy. As long as the black man who had the vote in the Cape Province, black people could vote. As long as the black man's vote is taken away, we will join. After 1910, in 1912, that's when the ANC is formed to fight this. To say, come on guys, we've got to fight this. And then we've got the great tragedy of the 1913, the Native Land Act. That says this is how people will live, and black people cannot hold title in what later would become white areas. You can't buy more land as a black man. I'm dealing with a case right now in Umzimkhulu that has its origins in that Land Act, where land in 1911, big farms were allocated in the Umzimkhulu area to black groups, and each family had their own area, and they were subdivided by the Surveyor General, but never transferred because the 1913 Land Act kicked into place, and those people couldn't get title deeds for their land. And today we're still trying to unravel that. In 1990s, they were given title deeds now to portions of those land. And it's a major issue. And those things from 1913 are still plaguing us today. Then we come fast forward. 1948, we've got the Group Areas Act, where we say, this is where you must go, this is where I'm going to go. This is the map of what we then ended up spatially with. From 1975, before that we had been forming and had these areas, this is the spatial map of what South Africa looks like. Many of you are too young to remember the TBVC states. 1975, the Transkei is formed as a state, because now we've got separatism. We're hearing sounds of separatism again in our rhetoric today. Do we want to go back to this? We must understand the history of our country if we want to understand where we're going to go in this land discussion. So now we've got these states. But look at that. Look at the area of the Transkei just below Lesotho on that map. That's bigger than Lesotho. The Xhosas have a massive area of land. It's as though, and you can have more land for them further south, it's as though the Xhosas, and they are of the proudest people in our group and have had some of the biggest impact politically in this country, are the most stable in a great way. When I go to Umtata High Court, there's a proud presence among the Xhosa people. And I would suggest something that could be very contentious. And I think the Zulus have much the same. When the land is broken up and fragmented and the tribes are broken up, people break up. But when there is a mass and the people are together, they stand together. I look at that map of the Transkei area and I see a people group that I believe are standing together in an incredible way and have had an impact on this country because the land is intact and it's recognized. Yes, they're chiefs and other groupings and they've got a traditional system and so on, but the land needs to be protected and intact for our people to survive and thrive. And where it's not, where it's broken up, like up at Polokwane, Kujo, when it's broken up and we start destroying our people. Okay, a lot of history on that one as well. We've got the war. We've got a civil war in South Africa. We've got a referendum in 1992. And this is very important. Because in the referendum in 1992, it's the first time I ever voted. 1992, we've just come out of this war has just ended. We're fighting communism, we're fighting this, we're fighting that, believe whatever propaganda you want about it, but 1992, the white people vote and they say, yes, we're going to move ahead and we're going to lay down arms, we're not going to fight this anymore, and we are going to continue with this road and we're going to integrate. We're going to stop this fragmentation and we're going to integrate. We voted. I think more than 2/3 said yes. But remember, 1/3 said no. And there are still people from that third who are reminding us today that they said no. And every time something goes wrong in this country, they say, we said no. Ek het mos vir julle gesê. I told you. But thank the Lord that he was not in the no vote. I firmly believe what Ryan has said today. And if you read Witness Forever, that God was in that process. God has been merciful to us in this country. God has saved us. So from 92, we went into what we called CODESA. Those were the negotiations. Some people tried to stop it. The right wing drove armored cars into the building. Our military stood, the white military stood and said, no, you can't do this. Thank the Lord that General Constant Viljoen, who had the strongest military in Africa at his beck and call, said, no, stop. People today do not realize how powerful that military was. They had nuclear capability. They had conventional systems. They had every part of this country cut up into little pieces. They could control it, and they were doing so lethally. And the problem is, if we'd carried on that road, we would have had it continue, and we had a massive genocide. And by God's grace, they said no. Go and read the book of the two brothers, where Constant Viljoen's brother, who was a Duminy, a minister, the role of the church, said, no, don't do this. If you only just get this narrative out of this discussion, it'll help us going forward. Maybe that's all the time we've got for today. And then we had our Constitution. And the incredible thing is our Constitution has aspects of all these systems of land ownership worked into it. It is the most unique Constitution when it comes to land. But most importantly, it has what we call the property clause. And now I really need to move. The property clause is in our Constitution, section 25.1, we said we're going to do this. We said property is going to be protected. It says no one may be deprived of property except in terms of law of general application, and no law may permit arbitrary deprivation of property. Legalese, all it says is your property rights are secure. You cannot have your property taken away. And what is property? It's what you own. Might be title deed, might be your jacket, might be your computer, might be your car, might be your shares on the stock exchange. It's property, it's everything. It's not limited to land. But what we did in our Constitution, we put in our Constitution a specific mandate for land reform. We said, guys, we realize we've got spatial problems, we've got inequality, we've got issues, but let's sort it out. And basically what we did is we said, we're laying down arms. White people said, we're giving up political power. The compromise, and our Constitution calls this a historic settlement, an historic compromise. We said, let's find a way. But what we're going to do is we're going to protect property rights. We're not going to just kick people off land. We're not just going to murder people. We're not just going to give retribution and have people lined up for firing squads because you were a police officer and you were there. We're going to have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we're not going to have vengeance and bloodshed anymore. We agreed to do this. So we had our TRC. You're too young to remember the TRC. Painful process. Not many people participated meaningfully in it. Our former president, P.W. Boer, refused to testify there. He refused. And many people, yes, you show Desmond Tutu because he's a communist. I weep when I hear that. He should have come. We had F.W. de Klerk testifying. We had Mandela. We had everybody. They all said, this is what we did. The ANC confessed some of its atrocities in its camps in Angola. We had the PAC confessing. We had APLA turning from the armed struggle. We had a time of confession. Then people said, okay, that's it. Let's move on. We're going to protect property and we're going to move on. So what does the Constitution say we're going to do? It says we are going to do land reform. We're not entirely sure how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it. But it says we're going to protect property rights. That was the undertaking. And I'm going to jump ahead here and I'll tell you why. Please go to slide 19. Here's a quote from Benjamin Franklin. And this is something, a principle I just want you to get. It says, democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on who to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. Do you get the principle? If you're the majority, you can do whatever you want. Literally. But you need to protect the lamb. And a minority in any legal system is always the lamb. Across the world, when you talk about refugees and you talk about persecutions, it's the minority that generally suffers. It's not the majority. And for some other reason, we as people like to take out the minority. You different, you that little group. Hitler, they're the Jews. Oh, they're the gypsies. Yeah, no, they're the bad guys. We're the majority. We've all got blonde hair. And if you're bald, it's okay, because if you were blonde, it's okay. Blue eyes, and now you can take them out. You've got to protect the lamb. The property clause is the protection for the lamb. Doesn't mean you have to give the guy a gun. This is the gun, and it should work. And the difficulty we face in South Africa is that we are very, very worried that we are watering down the gun that the lamb has. That's our problem. Democracy is not perfect. If you please go to slide 21. It then says in our constitution, it says, property can be taken away and expropriated if you've got compensation paid. And in South Africa we said, you're going to have just and equitable compensation. So if you go to the next slide, compensation clause, the next slide says, this is how the Constitution says we're going to do our compensation. It's going to be just and equitable, but it's going to take into account the following factors: the current use of the property, the history of the acquisition of the property, the market value of the property, the extent of the direct investment and by the state in the property, the purpose of the expropriation. And then specifically we said, for purposes of the section, the public interest includes the nation's commitment to land reform and to reforms to bring about equitable access to all South Africa's natural resources, and property is not limited to land. So, we said, these are the factors that must be considered. Right, now we fast forward. I'm going to fast forward quite a bit. We carried on, we started doing land reform, and I'll tell you exactly where I'll give you in a moment. Go to slide 25, please. We said we're going to do land reform in the following way, and it's accepted everywhere. There are 3 levels of land reform. The first tier is security of tenure. What we forget now is there were many people coming out after 94 who didn't have access to their own homes. They didn't have houses. In fact, the Mbeki administration said, listen, you need houses, not land. Mbeki wasn't so involved in land reform. The second tier is land restitution. If you had land taken from 1913, that's our cutoff point, from 1913 onwards, we will investigate, we'll either give you the land back or we will give you the money. One of the greatest tragedies in our country is many people have accepted money, said, we don't want the land, we want the money. You will not believe how much that has happened and how prevalent that has been. It's been an absolute tragedy. But we're trying to unravel this thing. And the third tier is land redistribution. So we've got 3 levels of land reform that we work at. And I must say, despite criticism, we've done very well on number 1. We started well on number 2, and then we started collapsing and we didn't push it through. And then we had politicians getting involved saying, oh, well, we can't do it this way, we've got to do it that way. And we've got to hold it, 1913 cutoff point, yeah, you agreed it, but we don't think we should have agreed it. And then we've got a problem coming. Because when people start to say, we agreed something, but now we want to go behind it, we're starting to breach the Constitution. And that's when the discussion came in and took us all by surprise, the great rise of the left wing. And when land and the whole issue on land became a big problem, started sort of 2013 with the Agri-SA thing and the great rise of the left wing. And what happens is, there are 4 problems that they start saying. The first one was they were sick and tired of our former president's corruption. They said Zuma must go. And then they said fees must fall. Some of you will remember fees must fall. And the great cry that came from the left wing was nationalize all land. Hold it. We've got a constitution. We agreed a process. Now we say let's nationalize all land. And the left wing started beating this drum. And the third one was, they said, willing buyer, willing seller. That's why land reform is going so slowly. That's why we're not achieving our goals here, because people don't want to sell their land. Absolute nonsense. More land, particularly in agricultural terms, changes hands over a period of 30 years. If the state had purchased all the land that came on the market over the last 30 years since 1994, they would have far exceeded any goals that they set for themselves. There are so many other ways to do it, but they said, willing buyer, willing seller. So what happened then, if you go to the next slide for me, please, is the ANC hit back. The ANC said, ooh, we're starting to lose votes to these guys. We've got a problem. And the ANC did a pretty good job. They actually then hit back, and fees must fall was victorious. And we call it Zuma's last dance. It was victorious because the ANC took it back and quietened it down. And if you ask the activists, that's a lie. But they sold the lie that it was victorious. He can tell you more about that. Furthermore, Zuma went out. ANC took the discussion back. And the land debate was taken back to the ANC. It's as though the ANC, the ruling party, said, oh, this land debate, oh, you're getting attention. We want it back. And they took it back in a really big way. Give back the land, don't pay for it when you take it. And they were scratching their heads, how are we going to do this? Oh, what we're going to do is we're going to appoint a commission. You go to the next slide. We have the Joint Constitutional Review Committee, which was to investigate the question, the following question. Look at the question. Is it necessary to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to provide for expropriation without compensation? What's happening? We're playing politics. We are moving away from the agreed settlement, and we're saying we're going to appease the left wing here. And we're going to get our votes back. If you look at where the ANC knows, I'm not sure that that worked entirely. But anyway, it's a very unusual way to address this issue. And what we had is we had public hearings. And they said, okay, we're going to ask the people. Let's ask the people. And in those hearings, we had a polarized, divided South Africa like never before. You stole our land. You murdering the farmers. You hate us. We hate you. We had some of the most vile and horrible rhetoric coming out here. And there were different views. And the view was, slide 42, the majority assessment was amendment was not necessary. But slide 43. What this actually came and gave us was two statements here. Jeremy Cronin was one of our ministers in the government, and he said, this diversion, he called it a problematic diversion, the land issue. He said, this is a proxy for a deeper challenge. He has some brilliant insight. We need to listen to some of this stuff. He wrote in 2018, the land debate is almost more about history. What I'm talking about, history. Symbolism, redress, justice, and black dignity than about land itself. And I experienced that firsthand. One of the talks I gave, University of PE, Nelson Mandela University. I gave a talk on land because I was saying, guys, we've got to engage with this, a lot more detail than what I'm doing here. Just trying to get to one issue today. And I spoke, and the people left, and there was a young black lady who came to me. She was weeping. She was in tears. She comes from a village near a town near where we live, Mount Frere. She said to me, Andrew, I never thought I would hear a white man express understanding about the history and about land and appreciation for black possession and ownership and struggle and pain like I had. And she said, you know, Andrew, we don't want your land. We want to know you. We want to know you as people. And she said, would you come and talk at our church in Mount Frere? Can we build bridges? Can we build relationship? I thought, wow, okay, here I am, a white man, you know, kick me out. She says, no, I want that relationship. I thought, okay, I think Max Dupree has a point here. And then, the next slide, in 2018, President Ramaphosa says, because remember, things don't happen in a vacuum. You've got to understand the story. President Ramaphosa says, we're going to nationalize, we're going to amend the property clause. He says it, we're going to amend it. And he says, we don't know when it's going to happen, but we're going to tell you how we're going to do it. Because we're taking the struggle back from the EFF. And this is what we were saying. Nationalizing of the land isn't going to take place. The Zulu king stepped in and said to Mr. Malema, no. No. And within a week, Malema was on his knees before the Zulu king, saying, oh, and he said, no, okay. Because remember, the Zulu king controls Ngunyama Trust that controls huge tracts of land. And then we said, but we think this is what's going to happen. It was probable that specific clauses would be identified for expropriation or classes of land for expropriation without compensation. Jeremy Cronin made the proposal. And he said, in cases of expropriation in the public interest, the state may, his proposal, 2018, withhold compensation where the property is an abandoned building, unutilized land, property held by unproductively and for speculative purposes, and labor tenant land.
So in 2018, we already had the draft from Minister Cronin. So when it happened in 2024, we shouldn't have been surprised. That's why when people say, oh, it's unconstitutional, I say, oh, we've debated this many, many times. Come on, guys, what's happening? It's been coming for a very long time. So we were predicting it. But the problem is, if you go to the next image where I have of President Ramaphosa, is he started to just talk about things like this. The report that he's had commissioned is an important step forward in our quest to right the original sin of South Africa. Hold it. What have we just done? We're now talking and saying the land issue is the original sin. I mean, this is like biblical language. The church stays quiet at this time. We let the politicians use language like this. They're saying, what do you mean the original sin? Yet people have been fighting for land all the time. But come on, this is going a bit far. What are you doing? Yes, we're going to sort this out. Yes, we're working on land reform, but don't elevate it to this for political gain. And then it happened, we have the Expropriation Act. Please go to slide 47. Wow, we're getting through them fast. And we have this act that everybody is, oh, no. It says to identify certain instances in its preamble where the provision of nil compensation may be just and equitable. And everybody, a lot of people say, but why do we need an Expropriation Act? We've always had an Expropriation Act, 1975. And I'm going to give you a very quick summary of what the position is. Expropriation means is if you need land for a certain purpose, in the public interest, you can take it away. But the accepted principle is you pay for it, you pay compensation. If the Johannesburg Metro needs a water pipeline, and the only way it can go through is through this property, they can expropriate this property, demolish it, and put this huge pipeline through here in public interest. If that's the only way, then you do it. It's been there for generations, and it was consolidated in 1975. And then they redrew it, and they presented this to us. And the Act, here I'm out on a limb, the 24 Act is much better than the old Act. The old Act, you didn't have due administrative process. In the new Act, they've got to notify you of the intention to do it. In the past, they could just say, we're expropriating, and we can talk about payment. Now they have to tell you, we're thinking about expropriating, you can object. Then after that, after your objection, they've got to consider it. Then they're going to say, okay, we're going to make a decision. You can review that decision and take them to court on that administrative review. And then they say, okay, but now we're going to make this decision, and this is how we're going to consult. And we can make a decision. So you've got a right to participate here like never before. Then further, if they do hit you with the expropriation, you can then take them, you can say, listen guys, we're going to go to court on this. But in the past, you had to go to court. Now you can say, I'm notifying you, you must take the matter to court. That's a new process for us that I think is brilliant. As a landowner, I'm saying, wow, I've got administrative and procedural protections here that I've never had before. I say categorically, this new act, and I have no political affiliation whatsoever, and I have no aspiration to join the ANC or become a minister, okay? Please, I'm not paid to say this, is a very good piece of legislation. But it contains a clause that everybody's worried about, that I think they didn't have to put in, but they put in for political purposes. That's clause 12.3. So here we've got determination of compensation. It still says there must be compensation. The starting point on expropriation is you must be compensated, must be just and equitable. This is good. We're upholding law here. Here's the crisis. This is what's got everybody going on. It may be just and equitable for nil compensation to be paid where land is expropriated in the public interest having regard to all relevant circumstances, including but not limited to, gives categories, which are effectively the Jeremy Cronin categories. We expected that. If you've abandoned a building in the middle of Johannesburg, you haven't paid the rates for so many years, apart from the fact that the state can sell the land or take your land and sell it for the rates, it can be said you've abandoned it, res nullius. That's a principle from our Roman law. You've abandoned the property. If, for example, you have received land from the state worth 12 million, and they have put in 10 million fencing and a dairy and a this, and you are farming it and doing this and you're doing things wrong, the state can come and say, okay, well, what's the value of the land? We put everything in here, we gave it to you. We can take it back without paying you. But if you put stuff in, then we'll pay you for that. You hear where we're going here? What is just and what is fair? How do we work this out? So we've got these categories. And the Labour 10 one is we don't have time for that discussion, but that's a difficult one in KZN. But the problem is this. May be nil in some circumstances, not limited to the following. Here's room for potential abuse. That's the problem. The fact that there's potential for abuse, in my view, doesn't make it unconstitutional. This is the big debate. We must stop the abuse. That's what everybody's scared of. The debates in South Africa is expropriation without compensation constitutional? I think following the ideology and the way our constitutional court currently thinks, I think they're going to uphold it because section 25.3 of our constitution is very, very broad. We have differences among us. Rayan and I differ on this. I might be wrong. I might be right. It's a nice thing about law, we can flip a coin. How would it be implemented? Challenges. What ideologies will drive the implementation? And this is perhaps the most important issue. I'm taking your land. Why? Because I hate you, you white pig. If that's the ideology, and if the implementation is driven because of hate, we've got to stop it. That's why we're here, to fight for justice, to fight for what's right. That's our role as the church. Next challenge is, what protections do citizens have against the act? Well, there are lots. Don't be scared, there are lots. And there are people who will stand up and fight with you. And now we're potentially waiting for the equitable access to land bill. There's going to be something that's going to come. So don't panic. Things are there. But what happened next? This is what got everybody talking and burning. Trump and Musk got involved. The president said, to enable the government of South Africa to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation is the reason why the act was passed. No, the act wasn't passed. It replaced the old act, and it has really good procedures in. But there is an ideology and a political game that is being played, for sure. And then it says, listen guys, you're in trouble. And what Trump then also included is he says, he shouldn't have done this because you mustn't conflate the two. He says, in South Africa, you took Israel to the international court and we don't like your relationship with Iran. He put the whole thing together. It's like, what's happening here? We're punishing everybody. And it's like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, the long and the short is, we now have refugee status for Afrikaner farmers, and it's now been expanded to, because they realize they've got trouble, for minority groups, to the United States. Because of the land debate? Because of our commitment to land reform? Because of an Expropriation Act that seems to reflect some of the ideologies in the Constitution, but must still be balanced against the other ideologies? We haven't got there yet. We've jumped the gun. This is a false start, guys. We're running ahead. And these are my views, not necessarily the views of Wilberforce or Rayan or anybody else. Okay, this is me saying, but I think I have looked at this for a long time. And I've studied, I've worked with this, and my heart is grieving. And what happened immediately after this? We've got pain, we've got hate, we've got anger. We're dividing our society again. And now we're starting to see the rift grow and grow and grow again because of the land issue. When I had a pastor many years ago stand up in 2016, I think it was, in my first discussions in Soweto to tell me that the Bible justifies that he can take up the gun and shoot me, I could use that to say, Mr. Trump, I'm coming, they want to kill me. I've had the direct threat on me. I could use the crime that I've been exposed to in South Africa. I was hijacked. I've had a gun held to my head. My wife was held by the other with a little baby in her arms. Things ripped off her. I've been through it. That doesn't make me a refugee. That means we are victims of sin, not crime. Sin. And we fight sin. And we fight what the enemy's throwing at us in this country. And we stand, as a church, we stand, we say, no, this is wrong. And if things that happen are wrong, and if somebody comes and says, listen, I'm taking your land, which I bought in 1999 on the strength of the Constitution, knowing that it is protected in a certain way, and I sold my house and I invested it in agricultural land, because that's what we felt was the right thing to do. I don't know what, I'm invested in this struggle. I'm invested here. I want to see this through properly. And if my land has to be taken away, and good comes of it as a Christian, I've got to say, Lord, so be it. Now, that is a huge statement. But the Bible doesn't promise us sunshine and roses. It says you're going to have persecution. I need to be prepared to say in this country, God, what is your will? What is your way? The New Testament church has a radical principle of sharing. I don't think the state should be entrusted with sharing our possessions, but the body of Christ can help us. This is where the church must get involved and say, Andrew, yeah, how are we going to work with this? Whose title deed? How's this going to work? I don't know where we're going. I love where I live. The farm is my home. It's where my children were raised. It's their memories. It's my castle. By the way, the Australian film is not entirely about the case, the Aboriginal case, but it has a principle of where you live, your home, your people. Don't disturb it. Don't break it. See, part of the problem that we have in South Africa is we have many in both communities who refuse to see the other story. We've got black people who refuse to see the white story and white people who refuse to see the black story. Oh, your grandmother was kicked off agricultural land in 1960 and left next to the road without food and water for 5 days, had to walk 300 kilometers to do this. There are real stories like that. And if those stories don't move us and break us and say, we did terrible things. And if the story of the St. James massacre with Appler throwing hand grenades into a church building, blowing bodies to pieces, doesn't shock you, then we've become hard and we cannot live together anymore. But let me tell you, I found a way. The only way forward for us is in God. We don't have the answers, and there's a lead up to that in the slides, but He does. This scripture is quoted so often and misquoted, but I want to use it in the context of this discussion today. This is vital. Notice the reference to land in the scripture. Land. If my people who are called by my name, and I believe we in South Africa, all of us are placed here. It is not by chance that you were born and raised and live in South Africa. I'm not running away. Unless God says, right, now you go to, like He said to Joseph, take the child Jesus to Egypt. I'm here. Will humble themselves and pray. And seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. There is so much wickedness in our country. And I will hear from heaven. I will forgive their sin and heal their land. That is the call. Why are we facing so many things we're facing in South Africa? I'm convinced it's because of the increase in wickedness in this country. We have seen sin and wickedness and occult practices in black and white communities increase like never before. God will never bless a country where there is occult. He will never bless us when we turn from Him. But when the church starts to turn in every community and abandon that which is holding us, and where Satan has his hand over us, and we humble ourselves. Notice, humble ourselves. The rhetoric on land right now is not humble. It's arrogant and full of pride and pain. When we humble ourselves, pray, seek God. This is the time for us to seek God. I will heal. This is what we need. This is where God wants to take us. So I can give you statistics about land reform, and I think we've done really well. Don't believe the 87% split that people are throwing around, white-black split. It's nonsense. They're lying. I've studied those stats. Go and read Cheryl Walker, the prof who's done incredible work. She says, guys, this is a myth. You're driving this on false news. Don't believe it. Look at it for yourself. Talk about it, but humble ourselves and pray. That's all I have time for. May God help us. Amen.